Hello, this is Alicia Walden, and today we're going to be reviewing the Allyn Bacon Guide to Writing, Chapter 11, Writing as a Problem-Solving Process. The authors show us in Chapter 11 how you can use writing to not only improve the content of a draft or of an assignment, but how you can also improve your writing processes as well, and use the peer review process to not only benefit your peers, but also to grow as a writer. Throughout the text, the authors talk about the concept of wallowing in complexity. In the opening chapter, part 3, they talk about how experienced writers use multiple drafts to do this and how to kind of work their way out of any confusion or work their way through any confusion they might be experiencing regarding a subject or paper. And then they use the beginning of this chapter, the authors do, to look at how expert writers use multiple drafts to not only move through that wallowing of complexity, but they also talk about Peter Elbow, who is a composition theorist, and how he asserts that the writing process evolves not only on paper but within the writer, because meaning is not what you start out with, but what you end up with, according to page 276. And in the early stages of writing, most writers are able to get out those first concepts or initial ideas and brainstorm, if you will, and then build them up as they either continue improving the actual language that they've written down or their research. On page 277, you'll find examples that the authors have included of a first draft with revision that have revisions that have been made along with the revised draft in figure 11.1. And it's a first year student who has made quite a few changes to the draft as well. One of the most prominent discussions that takes place in this chapter is the difference between how an experienced versus an inexperienced writer makes revisions. An inexperienced writer, according to experts, usually makes word choice changes or will go through and maybe change a transitional phrase, whereas a more mature writer or an expert writer will actually completely chop up whatever it is that they have and either reorganize or rewrite what they've written. So I think the moral to the story here is when you go through the evolution of writing a rough draft and turning it into a final draft, don't be afraid to completely change what you're working on. Don't be afraid to take out sentences, to completely revise paragraphs, or to take out paragraphs and add new ones. Don't just limit yourself to taking out words or trying to add in $5 words, because that's not necessary. That's not where the real progress takes place as a writer, or within your paper for that matter. Multiple drafts not only help writers overcome the limit of short-term memory, but they also help accommodate shifts in the changes of the writer's ideas, just as I mentioned before. So being able to commit to making change in your paper, not being afraid of making change in your paper, will allow you to develop quite a bit. So, for instance, if you find that you've been working on a paper from an angle that you're not finding good research on, you might have to change the direction that you're going in. You may have to go from being pro something to con. You might have to change 2 of your 3 supporting points, and that's okay. Just do yourself a favor and don't beat yourself up over it. Don't cry over spilled milk. That's what rough drafts are for. They're for changing. They're for making those kinds of adjustments. For example, when I'm working on my own papers, my own work, I find myself sometimes having to take out several pages of documents. And let me tell you, when you have a 15-page document or a 25-page document and you have to take out 5 pages, it is so painful. But then you have to remember, it's like, think of your paper like a living thing. Think of your paper like it's a tree. You can have a big old tree with lots of leaves on it and lots of branches, but if half of those branches are dead and half of them have leaves on them, you're going to do yourself a lot better by trimming off the branches that are dead and allowing new ones to grow, and allowing the water that you pour onto the roots of the tree or that rains down to go towards building new leaves and to feeding the leaves that are there. There's no point in having dead limbs in a tree any more than there is a point in having dead paragraphs in your paper. So it's okay, take it out. It's what happens. I write professionally, and I have to take pages out of documents. It's okay, it happens. Remember, it's part of growing. Moving on, the authors talk more about revising locally and globally. And really, what they mean there is you can revise something small in a little area and, like for instance, your word choice. And that'll make a little difference. But a global difference would be cutting those limbs from the tree, for instance. Now, you don't want to cut any live limbs. Be careful of that. But if you can see that something isn't working in your paper, cut it out. Don't just leave it in there because it helps you get space filled. You're better off cutting out that dead piece, putting in as much as you can, and going in and writing a new paragraph. Even if you only get to revise it once, it's better to have that new paragraph in there. The authors also suggest that you schedule your time. I also suggest that you schedule your time to develop expert writing habits and to further develop your writing processes. You should also make sure that you not only budget out your time so that you can have a rough draft, but when we have peer review opportunities, take part in it. Actually engage actively. Sometimes it's easy to see the students who don't have a lot of time and they'll put the kind of the minimum effort into it. Put as much effort into it as you can. You usually get back exactly what you put into it. Also, you want to make sure that you try to figure out what methods of drafting work best for you. For some people, writing out a paper longhand on an actual sheet of paper is the best method for them. Other people love typing their papers out. Most people type now. I've seen some people who do very well actually typing up their papers on their phones. I don't get that because it doesn't work for me, but for them it works. They can go sit in a park and do that. Now for me, I like to have my laptop in front of me. That's how I do best. But what works best for you? How are you the most successful? Don't just tell yourself you're successful when you have the TV on and you notice that really you're not, but you just want to watch TV. Do yourself a favor and be honest. Make sure that you understand that your first draft is your first draft. Everyone's first draft is imperfect. Mine is too. As you revise, make sure that you continue to think about the reader's needs. If you're using a specialized term, make sure you explain it for your audience. If you're using some type of acronym and you're not sure that anyone knows what it is, explain it. Towards the end of chapter 11, we learn a little bit more about how peer review can also help you when it comes to thinking and writing like an expert. The authors have many suggestions on strategies for how to respond helpfully to classmate drafts. Thankfully, in our class, the peer reviews are structured. So when we ask you to follow up on a peer review, we have very specific questions that we want answered. Those are the best kinds of peer reviews to participate in. You know what's expected out of you, and you know exactly what you need to complete. Have you ever participated in a peer review in which the instructor just said, hey, read that paper and give the classmate that you've exchanged papers with 3 points that they could strengthen their paper on? And they hand you the paper and you look at the paper and you're like, what? What am I looking for? How do I know what to strengthen? What? Yeah, well, I've been there too. So has Professor Coster. And that's why we have those questions for you to fill out when you're peer reviewing. There's a bit of structure there. But in case you ever end up in a scenario where it's a little bit more vague, pages 287 through 289 go over some steps and some thoughts to keep in mind when you're responding to peer review. Most importantly, when it comes to peer review, make sure that you remember that you're in charge of your own writing. And if somebody offers you a critique that you don't agree with, you do not have to change your paper. You're not obliged to. You should only do it if you're comfortable with it. And frankly, even if an instructor says you should change your paper, if you really, truly feel that that idea shouldn't be changed, don't do it. Now, your grade could be poorly affected by it, but if you want to stand by it, stand by it. Now, if it's a grammatical error or it's a structure error, or if you're not including enough words or something like that, that's actually a problem and you need to address that. But if there's something subjective, stand by your guns if you need to. Also, another thing, if multiple people review your document and every one of them mentions something that they don't understand and it's like the same thing, or they repeat the same type of statement over and over again independent of one another, then it is likely something that you need to correct or look into. That's it for now. I hope you have a great afternoon.